Ludwig, it's always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Yes, please, we can talk again because it's been a while, hasn't it?
It has in terms of being recorded.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
What I'd like to do today is to dive deeper into the audiobook version of the book that you wrote that I narrated so that people can get a better understanding of that. I've come up with some questions I'd like to ask you if that's all right.
Sure, sure, yes, we can do that.
Okay, so what prompted you to use The Lord of the Rings as a foundation to discuss the deeply rooted issues in society, and how can this allegorical story approach influence the listener's perspectives?
Mhm. So, what a small, tiny question.
They're all like that.
Uh, oh. Okay, so my first book. So there was a time when I was very much occupied with two things: thinking about the monetary system, and at the same time, I had a friend who wrote a book about the symbolism of the Bible,
Mm,
and I went into the depth of what the Bible really tells us because the translations we grew up with
yeah.
and that have been spread over so many centuries, they're completely useless, or almost complete, because it's a completely different message which relates um, to the human mind and the depth of the mind and the things that go on in the human mind. And so I dealt with that symbolic language that is being used for the Bible, and I found it's a kind of universal language that gives you access when you understand it, gives you access to all kinds of symbolic texts. And I've always been a fan since I first read it of the Lord of the Rings. And but in those years, um, well, that was like in the first decade of our century now. Um, I thought a lot about the monetary system and how it is the core problem that we have, and the thing that has never changed. Because if you look at politics, they try to change all kinds of things, but not the problem itself,
That's right.
which is which is the monetary system.
Mm,
And and I had a friend explaining me the concept of interest flowing money, and when that got into my brain and understood, well, that really is the solution. That really is the profound and still simple solution. So when I understood um, that money is the core problem, I was inspired to show what money really does to us. What money does to the world? What the money that we use? Money itself can be a very good tool, but the money we use creates specific forms of imbalance that can be mathematically deduced, logically deduced, and shown. This is what it is always doing. And so I came up with showing that it always creates automatically creates scarcity of money in the real economy.
mm,
It automatically creates a redistribution of wealth from the working people to the first to the rich, but then only finally only to the super rich,
mhm.
where all the money keeps accumulating. What after many centuries of redistribution, we see that a tiny group of people really controls this world because they own everything.
Yes.
And it also creates an automatic hostile competition that triggers wars and that triggers or that keeps a process going where the middle class is being destroyed and ever bigger corporations form.
Mhm.
And today we are kind of going towards the end of that process where as I said, a small group of people um, owns this whole world, and the middle class is kind of being erased, right? And they use politics to support that automatic development that comes from money itself. So I saw this is what money is doing, and whatever solution we try, if we don't address the root cause of it, we won't find a solution. We won't be able to do anything.
Yeah.
So the solution will be to find a way to change that monetary system so that it no longer exploits us and destroys us, but really starts at last serving us, serving the general public, the normal people, the working people.
The ones who are actually doing the production and the effort in order to produce things.
Sorry?
The ones who are actually doing the work to produce the stuff, as opposed to the
Yeah,
ones
all
who
the
are,
money, all
yeah,
the money should go to those who do the work
yeah,
and not to those who provide the money.
yeah,
Because providing money is not a service and should not be paid for.
no. And you touch on that as interest-free flowing money. Could you go a little more
Yeah.
deeply into that?
Let me elaborate on the other thing first a bit further,
Okay.
to show how I finally came to the Lord of the Rings, because
Yeah,
I
sure.
need to make that connection.
Yeah, sorry.
So if you look at the world today, there has been a process of redistribution behind it that's been going on for like around 6 centuries, even a bit more.
Hmm.
And if you go that time back to the High Middle Ages, or 7 centuries back to the High Middle Ages, there was quite a just distribution of wealth, not really just, but almost just at least in the central, in the wider central parts of Europe.
Hmm.
I mean, Germany had over 300 states at that time, so it was a decentralized setup.
Hmm.
And that's basically where we need to get back to that. So there was a point when everything started, and there's these automatisms which become worse and worse and worse just with time running by. I mean, the poverty becomes worse, the redistribution becomes worse, the hostile competition that destroys the middle class becomes worse and worse. The environmental destruction, which is the fourth automatism, becomes worse. And the fifth one is the centralization, and the centralization of power, which is the basic problem. We create a world that goes from top down. So when people think we have to elect the proper people to the top so they can change the world, but that's not how we're going to change things. Because they will always only work in their own interest. So what we need is, without the support of the working people, this ever more centralized system will collapse. If they don't exploit our work, they can't continue. So the power really is with us. And if we manage to set up a decentralized system that provides a just distribution of wealth, then, and we manage to stop paying our money to them, stop feeding their system, then their system will collapse. We can live without them, but they cannot live without us.
Yeah.
So it's all about the working people anyway. So when I saw that, I mean, I logically showed all these automatisms, but that all goes to the left half of the brain, and I thought I need to provide some pictures for the right half of the brain as well. And I thought, which pictures are best suited to show what actually this monetary system is doing? And then I kept seeing these pictures from the Lord of the Rings, and then I felt really this is it. I mean, we had a high Middle Ages with a deactivated interest money system, which was a time where the one ring was lost or absent. So
And the one ring in the book you
and
refer
the
to
one
is the high
ring
finance.
is the monetary
Yeah,
system.
yeah.
And it was originally far in the back. It was created by Sauron. But there was a ring war where, in the past, the Second Ring War, where Sauron was destroyed and the One Ring was eventually lost. It was taken over by Isildur and then lost. And only after it was found again, Sauron slowly started to regrow. So that shows that in the High Middle Ages, this redistribution system had been stopped for some time, and with a rather just distribution of wealth, and then the lending of money against interest returned because the interest-free flowing systems that we had in the High Middle Ages, they collapsed over time until the 15th century. The last ones collapsed, and then this old system, which had already been ruled during ancient Roman times, it returned. It came back. So the One Ring came back and started the redistribution. And after some time, Sauron recurred. So it says that at some point there's this Gandalf figure, the wizard Gandalf, who finds that Sauron, had been fearing that Sauron would return, and then he finds he really did return. Which means that once you have a monetary system where money is lent against interest, there will eventually be those who lend all the money who will accumulate so much wealth that they reach the status of a high finance, which means they reach a status where they control all the areas where their money is circulating, all the countries, all their governments, the entire economy. They will control everything through that money. And that high finance has built, or it has shown to recur during the 1600s, so the 17th century. Mm-hmm. It has become ever richer and ever more powerful ever since. It's the same families, the same people who still control this world today and try to get a monopoly on it. Mm-hmm. And basically, the entire symbolism of the Lord of the Rings shows the whole story, what happened. So the One Ring came back, the interest money came back, and then there's the story with the dragon Smaug, who conquers Erebor, which was the first effect of the monetary system, that the kings, the monarchs, had to borrow money at interest, and they incurred ever bigger debt to have their wars. Mm-hmm. And they needed more and more money. In order to do that, they had to tax more and more. They had to raise tax, and they had to see how. They even were forced to tax the churches, or try to tax the churches, and they also tried to tax the aristocracy. Mm. So the real power base they have is the aristocracy, but they kind of alienized, or how to say that, they made the aristocracy their own enemies, because they asked for total absolute power, absolutism, for themselves, in order to get enough money, in order to serve just the debt towards the moneylenders, who were the real, even then, which is Sauron, were the real people in power behind the monarchs, even at those times. Yeah. And the dwarves at the Erebor, they symbolize a good supply of wealth to everybody. So the dragon taking the Erebor symbolizes that the absolutism, the thirst of the kings for money, they were used by the moneylenders to suck the money out from the people, so that the just wealth that the people enjoyed during the High Middle Ages, that was destroyed. So that was this dragon taking the Erebor. So then 13 of these dragons, 13 of these dwarves finally came to Bilbo in search for a solution, which is where the entire story of the independence of the United States of America is encoded in the Hobbit, and that's part of the book, which can be read. With Tolkien giving a few clues, like being 13 dwarfs, referring to the 13 first states who founded it.
Yeah.
That's one of the clues he gave. There's many more which you can read in the book or hear from the audiobook. It's even better with Adrian's narration. And so that was the absolutism. Then came colonialism, which means that when the absolute rulers in Europe saw, okay, we can't tax more, then it was the moneylenders themselves that said, well, look, there's other countries. Why don't you go out and colonize the world and extract money there, and then you have enough money. So even colonization that started at the end of the 15th century was triggered by the One Ring, by the monetary system that returned after the High Middle Ages. So the driving factor behind our history was encoded by Tolkien in the story of the Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And the really dramatic phase is the last 200 years in our time and the next decades. That is really the dramatic events in the Lord of the Rings, where everything comes to a head, because we are now in a world that is so extremely crazy, because everything is coming to absurd proportions, where we will come to a point where either we liberate ourselves or everything will end. And because life has a tendency to go on, I'm sure we will find a way to solve this problem and to restore the power back to the people through us seizing responsibility to have our own interest-free monetary system, which we can go into a bit, which is also in the symbolism, so that we can ultimately bring about a world of just wealth for everybody and save this planet from destruction. So with that, we can go to the core symbolism of the Lord of the Rings, which is that Sauron forged the One Ring in Mount Doom, in the embers, in the abysses of Mount Doom, which clearly shows what's going on, really, in symbolic form. Mordor, Mount Doom is in Mordor. Mordor stands for materialism, and all these, like Tolkien writes that all these figures who would fight for a better world, like all the elves, all the men of the West, they cannot live in Mordor because there's nothing to live. Which means, and the elves and men, they stand for different spiritual principles. Like the elves for the spiritual level, so which is basically love and compassion and forgiveness and these things, and the men for the mental level, which is basically integrity, justice, and these things, that the principles that they stand for. And in a totally materialistic world, in Mordor, these things cannot exist. So, and it's in Mordor where there is Mount Doom, and the ember and the embers. It's kind of a volcano, right? Which keeps growing this Mount Doom. The mount itself is a symbol for lack, poverty, and scarcity. And at the core, where there is this hot, the hot embers of I don't know what you call the core of a volcano. It's not the embers, right? It's what
Lava.
Just the lava, right?
Yeah.
The lava. Where Sauron forged the One Ring, this lava symbolizes the guilt that is at the guilt that is at the core of the system, or in terms of money, you would call it debt, right? And if you are kept in a guilt, you work to redeem the guilt. You keep working and working and working, and everything you do is taken away from you. So that means poverty. So there's a direct connection between guilt and poverty, which is the lava at the core and the Mount Doom itself. So, which means that the money that is being lent is connected to people going into a debt, or not only people, but entire peoples, entire countries, entire economies going into a debt they can never get away from again, which just keeps growing and growing and growing, because there's an automatism that debt has to grow. Because if within the system you repay debt, you create such a scarcity of money in the system that everything will collapse. So in order for the economy not to collapse, debt has to grow. It has to keep growing. That's what we see. And along with the growth goes the redistribution from the working to the super rich, which is how the system is run. And that is contained in this picture of the One Ring being forged there. And the solution is like to throw it back into this lava, which means that we have to find a way of circulating money without an ongoing payment of interest on debt. So interest-free flowing money, it works by, like, how to say, by a fee on the money itself, or by in the High Middle Age, it was called a money tax. That the money itself was being taxed. It was the Bracteate system that was basically run in Central Europe, where the monarchs recalled the money every 2 or 3 years, and kept every 10th coin, and it was cheap coins they gave out. And you received 9 new coins for 10 old ones, and the 10th one was the tax that he kept, the tax on the money for his own expenses. And in this way, there's different ways of generating interest-free flowing money, but that was one way how you can do it. Which means that when you lend money and you make the arrangement, in 1 year you give the money back to me, and in the meantime there's a taxation. It means when you lend it away and you give 10 coins, you get 10 coins back. If you keep it and you keep the tax yourself, you have only 9 coins for the 10. So the borrower does the lender a favor, because the lender, if in a certain period of time he has money that he doesn't need and he lends it away, he doesn't pay tax on it. So the incentive to lend money away does not come from interest that you earn, but from tax that you avoid, that you legally avoid that way. And that makes everyone with excess money wanting to lend money interest-free. And on the other hand, those who borrow the money, they have no interest in hoarding it either, because they don't want to pay the tax either. So they only borrow it if they really need it and spend it, which means if you have a tax on money, you have 2 effects. The one is you have interest-free loans, which are easy to pay back. You just have to pay back the loan. And the other thing is that nobody wants to pay the tax, so the money circulates very, very fast. And the faster money circulates, the more wealth it generates. And that has been the effect in the High Middle Ages. That will be the effect again. because what you have today is, and what kills all the SMEs, all the middle class companies, is they have to pay a high portion of their money to the banks or to the investors, and also in tax because of the debts of the government debts that we have. But if we introduce an interest-free system, the money that goes to the investors will be zero. The money for tax will only be the things that is really needed. No interest of the no public interest, no public debt that has to be covered, which basically means you create an economy where 100% of the money earned by the companies goes to the entrepreneur and his employees. And that would be a system. I don't think we can introduce it centrally, like via the central governments, but that has to come from the bottom, from either from the communities who say, well, we do this now, or like from a network of companies who say, well, we introduce our own money and run our own money in this way, and this way we all provide ourselves with loans that are interest-free so that we can invest in any project we want without paying interest on money. So that is very much contained in the symbolism of the One Ring and Sauron, and basically the entire history that came because we lost the just system in the High Middle Ages. Mm-hmm. And what happened and why the things that happen in history happen at all, up to the world wars and up to the problems of our time. All that is contained in the symbolism of the Lord of the Rings. And I explain it in the book, and you've done a wonderful job narrating it.
Thank you very much. You've answered most of the questions I wanted to ask you, bar a couple.
You want to say anything more you want me to clarify? Or?
Well, I'd like to know what emotional or intellectual journey do you hope listeners will embark on by understanding these hidden deeper meanings of the high finance system as depicted in the book?
What journey people will embark on?
Yeah.
Well, we have to understand that the current monetary system is completely crazy. And it cannot be remedied in any way.
No.
It cannot.
Yeah.
And it runs it runs towards its own destruction. However, the high finance hope to have a transition, basically where they run the system, where they say, well, the problem is if we do everything digital, then we can solve all these, as I always do. They make us promises. If we do everything digitally, then we won't have these problems, which basically means you agree to being slaves and we run the system. So that's what they try to do.
Yeah.
That's what they're going to try to do. Yeah. And we have to be aware. I mean, everyone has to be aware. If we do that, we agree to being slaves. Mm-hmm. And I guess I hope, and I'm very hopeful, and I think there will be enough people who don't want that. Not only in theory, but also in practice. Mm-hmm. Don't want that. And that's the people who are having to work together to set up an alternative system from the basis up. And that, as I say, has to be decentralized. So many of the things we need are already happening. Like we need solutions in the agricultural sector. We need to find solutions where we provide ourselves with enough to eat when we say to the system, goodbye, we're not following you.
Yeah.
We're not going digital.
Yeah.
If you abolish cash, goodbye. Right?
Yeah.
That's where we need to get. And that's what I want people to understand.
Well, I think one of the other things that's worth just bringing in there, Ludwig, is that the system is designed to make people feel separate from each other. And that's where it has strength and we are weak. But when we work as teams, as communities, as
Yeah,
co-collaborators, that's
yeah,
where our real strength is. And that's what we're great at. We're great as working as small communities.
exactly. Yeah, the system is completely uh, one part. I mean, the third automatism, which is hostile competition, brings that hostile competition into every sector of the
Yeah.
community, where people think, well, you have to be better than someone else. You have to beat them. You have to outrun them. So making people fight against each other because they think it's necessary to survive. But that is, how do you say, that's Maya. That's illusion.
Mm,
It's not true.
mm.
It's
No.
us. We can decide to work together and set up our own system, which is just, and where nobody has to fight against others just to survive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And interest-free money will be a good solution to do that. I mean,
Yeah.
will be a good part to run such a system very efficiently to really provide wealth for those who do this.
Yeah.
But of course, the first step is to say, well, look, we don't want to follow this crazy system anymore. Let's see solutions. And what we have to do, of course, is we see them, they are heading towards a point where they will abolish cash. And we have to think, okay, if they do that and we don't want to use their system, what will we need? And
Yeah.
then we can see now, okay, how can we set up what we need so that we have these things when they do that?
Yeah. They had
That's what
something in, was it Tyrol? They did something in Tyrol in the last
in
century.
Virgil, yeah, yeah. I mean, this system, interest free, the one economist who did this was Silvio Gesell, was a German who lived in Argentina for some time, then returned to Germany in the early 20th century, and he explained how to efficiently run an interest-free monetary system, and then that was run in Austria. There were two other systems also, which I can briefly touch upon, and in Virgil they used this as they called it working slips or something in order not to call it money. So like 1 hour of work kind of thing. And they made a monthly tax, a monthly fee on it, so it circulated fast. And so while Austria, just like everybody else during the time of depression, during the world economic crisis in the early 30s, had a huge amount of unemployed people. Virgil itself greatly reduced the unemployment, and they also started some public projects like building a bridge, building certain buildings and things, which were all funded by this alternative money. And they fared much, much better than the rest of Austria, to the point that a huge number of other uh, communities, other towns in Tyrol had invited the mayor of Virgil to tell them how the system is run. And when the central bank in Vienna saw what they were up to, they said they prohibited this whole thing by telling them, if you don't stop immediately, we send troops. So they were threatened by military force to stop this. So this once you run a system of interest-free flowing money, it's much superior to the current system.
Oh, yeah.
It's much superior. It creates more wealth. People want it because, well, what better can happen to you than taking loans you don't pay interest for? I mean, and then you can finance everything, and you never in a danger of running into kind of debt uh, that you can never pay back,
Mm-hmm.
which cannot happen with such a system. So, and the other two projects that were run was in Switzerland, where they had a network of companies, and also in the north of Bavaria and in Thuringia in Germany. They also had over 1,000 companies that set up their own alternative currency. And once it started to run and show benefits to them, then Berlin came and said, no, you're not allowed to do this. So they just Because once interest-free flowing money shows that it is far superior to the current system, the only thing the system can do is to prohibit it, suppress it, and tell people it's of no use, which is a lie, of course. But the symbolism of Tolkien shows us what the solution is, and it also gives us hope that we will manage to find that solution. I think that in the symbolism, there's also a clue for the time when they will try the cash abolishment is when Frodo and Sam run through, well, not run, but slowly walk through Mordor and get into the hands of a troop of orcs. They have to go along before they finally manage to break free and go to Mount Doom and destroy the ring. I think that is a proper symbolism for a time when it will be very difficult, but that will eventually be followed by a just system that's being introduced that destroys the old, which is the One Ring. Which means the moment they abolish cash, will create some difficulties for us. Because the majority will run along and say, well, let's take the digital, if only we have something to eat. And the others who don't want to really have to set up solutions.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to have to do.
That's really interesting. It's funny, because I read your book, and then I said to you about it would make a good audio book, and then I agreed to. Well, I've never done an audio book before I did it, so yours is probably the most read book I've got, because I read it the first time, then I read it while I was doing the dictation, then I read it again when I was doing the editing, and each time I went through it, there was more depth and more connection to it to see what was actually going on. It's a fascinating thing. And I'm very hopeful that people will be willing to invest the 16 plus hours of audio listening to it to get a really deep feel for what's going on and what's possible. Because one of the things it gave me was great hope that whilst the future might look dark, it's always darkest before the dawn. And I can see some really nice stuff coming at the end of that. As to what the timing is on that, I don't know. But it certainly left me feeling more hopeful, because I could see a pattern. I could see resolution to that pattern as well.
Yes, and I went through the same process when I wrote the book in 2017, because I had like translated some of the symbolism. I hadn't gone into the complete depth before I actually wrote it all down. And when I wrote it all down, I really went into the depth of all this. And then I understood how it will probably unfold, how things will unfold, and that there is really hope for us that we will manage to go through this, and we will ultimately manifest the solution, and the old will just fall away.
Yeah. Ludwig, that was awesome.
Yeah.